The greatest mistake a king can make is believing that a quiet heart has no throne. Moonlight spilled across the white marble courtyard of Silvercrest Palace, turning every stone into polished silver while hundreds of wolves gathered beneath towering banners that danced in the cool autumn wind. The scent of cedar, fresh rain, and burning lantern oil drifted through the night as nobles from every allied pack waited for the ceremony that would decide the future of the Northern Territories. No one laughed. No one whispered above a careful murmur. Even celebration carried rules inside the Alpha King's court. At the center of the grand platform stood King Alpha Rowan Ashford, his black ceremonial coat trimmed with silver embroidery catching the glow of countless lanterns. He looked exactly as every story described him: commanding, disciplined, impossible to read. His pale gray eyes swept across the assembled crowd before settling on the young woman standing several feet away. Evelyn Hawthorne lowered her gaze, not from fear, but from respect. Her simple ivory dress held none of the jewels worn by the daughters of wealthy Alpha bloodlines. She carried no family crest. No attendants stood behind her. To everyone watching, she looked exactly like what years of rumors had claimed: a quiet omega with nothing to offer the throne. The silence stretched long enough for every heartbeat to become its own echo. Elder Magnus stepped forward, his ancient voice carrying across the courtyard with practiced authority. Before the moon bears witness, King Rowan Ashford will speak his final decision. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward the throne. Rowan never hesitated. The moon may have chosen this bond, he said calmly, but I will not. His words settled over the gathering like winter frost. I reject Evelyn Hawthorne as my destined mate. No gasp escaped the crowd. Years inside royal courts had taught every noble to hide surprise behind perfect manners. Still, the air itself seemed heavier. Evelyn remained perfectly still. She did not plead. She did not protest. Her breathing stayed slow and steady while her fingers lightly brushed the silver ring resting against her hand. It had been placed there only weeks before as a symbol of destiny. Now it felt strangely weightless. Rowan looked at her once more, his expression never changing. A queen must strengthen a kingdom, he continued. She cannot simply hope kindness will be enough. Somewhere behind the nobles, someone quietly nodded. Others lowered their eyes. The judgment sounded final. Predictable. Reasonable. Evelyn slowly slipped the ring from her finger. The tiny circle caught the moonlight for a brief second before resting silently in the open palm of her hand. She stepped toward the polished stone table placed between them and laid it there without a single trembling movement. I understand, Your Majesty, she answered softly. Her voice carried no anger, no bitterness, only quiet acceptance. Rowan gave the smallest nod, already turning away as if the decision had closed another page in the endless duties of a king. The ceremony was over. At least, that was what everyone believed. Evelyn descended the marble steps alone. Her shoes barely made a sound against the stone path leading away from the palace gates. Lanterns flickered beside her while autumn leaves drifted across the walkway in slow circles. No servant offered to escort her. No noble spoke her name. She had become invisible before she even reached the courtyard entrance. Yet as she passed beneath the ancient archway, something unexpected happened. 3 elderly council members standing far from the crowd lowered their heads ever so slightly. The gesture lasted less than a heartbeat, so subtle that no one else seemed to notice. Evelyn never looked toward them. She simply continued walking into the quiet night, one hand resting gently against the small silver key hidden beneath the fabric near her heart, while high above the palace walls, a lone white falcon lifted into the moonlit sky and disappeared toward the frozen northern horizon. Evelyn did not look back even once as the palace gates slowly disappeared behind her, their white towers fading beneath the silver glow of the full moon until they became little more than distant shadows against the mountains. The cold autumn breeze carried the faint sound of music from the celebration still continuing inside the royal walls, but with every quiet step she took, the voices became softer, as though the night itself had chosen to bury them. Dry leaves drifted across the stone road before settling around her boots. She held her shoulders straight, refusing to let sorrow bend them, although the silence pressing against her chest felt heavier than any burden she had ever carried. Beneath the collar of her simple ivory dress rested the small silver key that had remained hidden against her skin since childhood. It felt warmer than before, almost as though it had awakened with the breaking of the mate bond. She reached the old forest path that curved away from the capital, where towering pine trees blocked the palace lights from view. Only then did she allow herself to stop. She closed her eyes and drew one slow breath after another, filling her lungs with the scent of cedar, damp earth, and distant rain instead of polished marble and royal incense. The quiet was unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. Her fingertips rested lightly against the hidden key. Memories returned with unexpected clarity. Her mother had fastened the tiny chain around her neck years earlier, kneeling to meet her eyes with a gentle smile that carried both warmth and sadness. "There will come a day when the world tells you who you are," she had whispered. "Do not believe it. Wait until the key calls you home." Evelyn had never understood those words. As the years passed, they became nothing more than a cherished memory spoken by a woman she barely remembered. Tonight they echoed inside her heart with startling force. Somewhere high above the forest, wings beat against the night sky. She looked up just in time to see a white falcon gliding between the clouds before disappearing toward the frozen northern horizon. A quiet smile almost appeared across her face. Almost. Far behind her, inside Silvercrest Palace, servants hurried through brightly lit corridors preparing for another royal banquet. Nobles congratulated one another, believing the kingdom had escaped a weak future beside an unremarkable Omega. King Rowan accepted their respectful bows with calm composure, answering every political conversation with measured confidence. Yet even as he spoke, an elderly servant paused while clearing the marble ceremony platform. Resting alone upon the polished stone remained the silver ring Evelyn had removed only minutes earlier. The old man stared at it for several long seconds before carefully lifting it with both hands instead of tossing it aside. His expression held quiet reverence that no one noticed. Back within the forest, Evelyn resumed walking until the trees opened into a forgotten clearing where a weathered stone fountain stood untouched by time. Moss covered nearly every carved surface except for one small symbol etched into its center. Without thinking, she reached forward. The silver key beneath her dress grew noticeably warmer. Before her fingers could touch the ancient carving, a deep chime echoed through the clearing. It was soft, almost impossible to hear, yet every bird resting among the branches suddenly took flight together. Evelyn stepped back, startled by the strange response. Then the warmth vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The clearing returned to perfect stillness, leaving only drifting leaves and moonlight across the stone. She did not realize she had just awakened something that had been waiting in silence for more than 20 years. Evelyn remained beside the ancient fountain until the first pale light of dawn softened the darkness between the towering pines. Dew shimmered across the moss-covered stones, and the crisp morning air carried the scent of cedar needles and distant mountain streams. Nothing around her suggested that the quiet chime from moments before had changed the course of her life, yet the forest no longer felt empty. It felt awake. She rested one hand over the silver key hidden beneath her dress and continued north along a narrow trail she had never noticed before. The path should not have existed. She had crossed these woods countless times during her childhood, gathering herbs and delivering supplies to villages beyond the capital, yet this winding road seemed to emerge only as she approached it. Wildflowers brushed gently against the hem of her dress, untouched by the coming autumn frost, while shafts of golden sunlight filtered through branches that seemed older than memory itself. Several hours later, she reached a weathered stone bridge crossing a clear stream no wider than 15 feet. As soon as her foot touched the first slab, the water below rippled without wind, reflecting not the bright morning sky above, but thousands of tiny silver stars. Evelyn paused, blinking once before the vision disappeared. The stream became ordinary again. She wondered whether exhaustion had begun to play tricks on her senses. She smiled faintly at the thought and kept walking. Far to the south, Silvercrest Palace stirred with another busy morning. Royal advisors filled the council chamber, presenting reports concerning trade agreements, border patrols, and neighboring Alpha territories. King Rowan listened with his usual calm precision, answering each concern without hesitation. The rejection ceremony had already become another completed duty in his disciplined mind. Yet while one advisor spoke about grain shipments arriving before winter, another messenger entered carrying an unusual parchment sealed with dark blue wax. The crest impressed into the seal had not appeared in any official records for more than 2 decades. Before the messenger could approach the throne, Lord Cedric, the oldest member of the royal council, quietly intercepted him. His weathered face changed almost imperceptibly as he recognized the unfamiliar emblem. Without breaking the flow of the meeting, he slipped the unopened letter inside his robe. His heart beat faster than it had in years. No one else seemed to notice. Miles away, Evelyn climbed a gentle hillside until the forest suddenly opened into a breathtaking valley surrounded by snow-capped peaks. At its center stood the ruins of an ancient sanctuary built from white stone that glowed softly beneath the morning sun. Vines embraced broken pillars, and crystal-clear water flowed through narrow channels carved into the ground in graceful patterns. Although abandoned, the place carried no feeling of decay. Instead, it seemed patiently preserved, waiting for someone who had simply arrived later than expected. As Evelyn stepped inside the circular courtyard, every birdsong ceased at once. Silence settled across the valley. She instinctively reached for the silver key again. This time it was no longer merely warm. It pulsed with a gentle rhythm that matched the beat of her own heart. Before her stood an enormous stone doorway covered with intricate carvings of wolves standing beside crowned figures beneath a full moon. There was no visible lock anywhere on its surface, yet the key resting against her chest suddenly shimmered beneath the fabric of her dress. Evelyn stared at the forgotten doorway, unable to explain the strange certainty growing within her. Somehow, without anyone ever telling her, she knew this place had not been waiting for centuries. It had been waiting for her. The valley held its breath as Evelyn slowly climbed the wide stone steps leading toward the enormous doorway. Every footstep echoed softly through the abandoned sanctuary, although no wall stood close enough to return the sound. Tiny streams flowed between white marble pathways, their water so clear that polished stones beneath looked untouched by time. Wild ivy covered broken columns, yet not a single leaf had crossed the final staircase before the ancient gate. It was as though nature itself respected an invisible boundary. The silver key resting beneath Evelyn's dress grew warmer with every step until she could feel its gentle pulse through the fabric. She stopped only a few feet from the towering doorway and studied the carvings more carefully. Wolves stood beside crowned women whose faces had been worn smooth by centuries of wind, while stars surrounded a single full moon engraved above them all. Her fingers brushed across one weathered symbol, and an unexpected memory surfaced. She remembered tracing the same shape with her mother many years before beside a fireplace during a winter storm. At the time she had believed it was only a bedtime story. Her mother had smiled softly and said, "Some doors never disappear. They simply wait for the right hand." Evelyn had laughed because she was only a little girl. Now those forgotten words settled over her with startling clarity. Without thinking, she reached beneath her collar and carefully removed the silver key from its chain. Morning sunlight struck its polished surface, revealing delicate markings she had never noticed before. Tiny stars circled a crescent moon, forming the very same design carved across the ancient doorway. Before doubt could stop her, she lifted the key toward the center of the stone. The air changed. A gentle breeze swept across the valley, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine despite the late autumn season. The streams surrounding the sanctuary shimmered as ripples spread in perfect circles without a single pebble disturbing the water. Then a quiet click echoed from somewhere deep inside the massive doorway. Evelyn froze. Fine lines of pale silver light slowly spread across the ancient carvings like moonlight flowing through hidden rivers beneath the stone. Dust drifted gently into the air as the enormous doors separated by only a few inches. No grinding sound followed. No violent movement disturbed the peaceful valley. It felt less like something had been forced open and more like an old friend had finally been welcomed home. A warm glow spilled through the narrow opening, revealing the outline of an immense circular chamber beyond. Shelves carved directly into white stone curved around the room from floor to ceiling, filled with carefully preserved scrolls, crystal vessels, and beautifully crafted crowns resting beneath clear glass domes. None showed signs of neglect. Everything appeared patiently maintained despite the absence of any visible caretaker. Evelyn stepped inside almost instinctively. As soon as both feet crossed the threshold, the silver key became cool once again. Behind her, the great doors remained open. They had not trapped her. They had invited her. At the exact same moment, nearly 300 miles south inside the royal archives beneath Silvercrest Palace, Lord Cedric carefully unfolded the mysterious parchment he had hidden from the Morning Council. His weathered hands trembled as he read only a single sentence written in elegant silver ink. "The Queen's blood has crossed the northern gate. Prepare the guardians." Cedric slowly closed his eyes. 24 years of silence had ended with 12 simple words, and somewhere far beyond the capital, the young woman every noble believed had vanished forever stood unknowingly at the center of a destiny that had awakened long before she was born. The chamber beyond the ancient doorway was brighter than any place illuminated by sunlight alone. A soft silver glow drifted from the polished walls themselves, bathing every shelf, every carved pillar, and every carefully preserved relic in quiet radiance. Evelyn walked slowly across the smooth white floor, her footsteps almost disappearing beneath the peaceful silence surrounding her. Dust did not cover the books. Cobwebs did not cling to the corners. It was as though unseen hands had faithfully cared for this sanctuary every single day despite no living soul standing inside. Her gaze wandered across dozens of portraits displayed along the curved walls. Each painting showed a crowned woman standing beside an enormous white wolf beneath the full moon. Their eyes carried the same calm determination, the same quiet strength that needed no display of power to command respect. Evelyn paused before the final portrait. The woman wore a silver crown shaped like intertwined branches and stars. Her light hair rested across one shoulder, and her gentle smile seemed strangely familiar. Evelyn lifted her hand toward the painting without understanding why. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Before her fingertips reached the frame, a clear voice echoed through the chamber. "Welcome home, Your Majesty." Evelyn turned sharply. An elderly man dressed in deep blue robes stood several feet behind her. His silver hair rested neatly across his shoulders, and his warm amber eyes carried tears that reflected the glowing chamber. Beside him stood 6 men and women wearing white ceremonial cloaks fastened with silver clasps shaped like wolves beneath a crescent moon. None carried weapons. None appeared threatening. As one, they slowly lowered themselves to one knee. Their movement was graceful and deliberate, filled not with fear, but with profound respect. Evelyn stared at them in complete disbelief. "There must be some mistake," she said quietly. "You have the wrong person." The elderly man smiled with remarkable kindness. "For 24 years we feared we might never see you again. There has never been another." He placed one hand over his heart before lowering his head even farther. "My name is Alistair. I was the royal keeper before your mother entrusted us with one final promise." Evelyn felt the silver key grow warm again in her hand. "My mother," she whispered. Alistair nodded. Queen Elinor Hawthorne knew that dark days were coming. To protect the bloodline, she sent her only daughter away before anyone could discover where the true heir had gone. The words settled over Evelyn like falling snow. She wanted to question everything. She wanted to deny every impossible sentence she had just heard. Yet something deep inside her remained strangely calm, as though a forgotten part of her heart had recognized the truth long before her mind could accept it. Alistair slowly extended both hands. Resting upon a velvet cushion lay a delicate silver circlet woven with tiny stars identical to those engraved upon the key. "This does not make you our queen," he said softly. "It only reminds us that you have always been her." Tears gathered in Evelyn's eyes, not from grief, but from the overwhelming weight of memories she never knew belonged to her. She looked once more at the portrait on the wall and finally understood why its smile felt so familiar. She had been looking into the face of her own mother. Far away in Silvercrest Palace, Lord Cedric stood alone beside a narrow window overlooking the royal gardens. Another messenger arrived breathless from the northern frontier and quietly handed him a sealed report. Cedric broke the wax and read the first line. His face lost every trace of color. "The guardians have found the rightful heir." Without another word, He folded the parchment and turned toward the throne room, knowing that before many days had passed, the kingdom would begin to learn that the woman everyone believed had walked away with nothing had unknowingly stepped back into the destiny prepared for her since the day she was born. Evelyn remained silent for a long moment, her eyes moving from the silver circlet resting upon the velvet cushion to the faces kneeling before her. None of them showed uncertainty. None searched her expression for permission to believe. They already believed. That realization unsettled her more than the impossible story she had just heard. She carefully lifted the circlet with both hands. It was lighter than she expected, almost weightless, and the delicate silver branches reflected the same gentle glow flowing through the sanctuary walls. The instant her fingertips touched the cool metal, a quiet warmth spread through her hands and into her chest. It did not burn. It comforted. Tiny points of silver light shimmered across the chamber before fading like stars disappearing at sunrise. No one spoke. Every guardian simply watched with peaceful smiles, as though they had witnessed this moment many times in dreams before seeing it become real. Evelyn slowly lowered the circlet without placing it upon her head. "If everything you have told me is true," she said softly, "then why did no one come for me before now?" Alistair rose to his feet with calm dignity, though the others remained kneeling. His eyes reflected both sorrow and relief. "Because your mother gave us one command above all others," he answered. "Protect her life before protecting her crown. The sanctuary would only reveal itself after your own heart freely chose its path. No one could force destiny to arrive early." Evelyn looked down at the silver key resting beside the circlet. Suddenly her childhood memories no longer seemed scattered and incomplete. They fit together like pieces of a forgotten map. The bedtime stories about queens who served before they ruled. The lessons about kindness carrying greater strength than pride. The quiet insistence that true leadership began long before anyone offered a throne. None of it had been ordinary teaching. It had been preparation. Outside the sanctuary, the valley awakened beneath brilliant morning sunlight. White birds circled gracefully above the marble ruins, while mountain streams sparkled like ribbons of crystal. For the first time since leaving the palace, Evelyn allowed herself a slow, peaceful breath. The ache left behind by rejection had not disappeared, but it no longer defined her. It had become only one chapter inside a much larger story she had never known existed. Hundreds of miles away, King Rowan stood upon the western balcony of Silvercrest Palace watching the capital come alive below. Merchants filled the streets, wagons rolled through the city gates, and banners bearing the royal crest fluttered proudly above every tower. Everything appeared exactly as it should, yet an unfamiliar restlessness lingered beneath his usual calm. He could not explain why the palace seemed strangely quieter since Evelyn's departure. He dismissed the feeling as lingering exhaustion from the ceremony and turned toward the council chamber where advisors eagerly presented portraits of noble daughters from influential Alpha families. Several alliances promised stronger trade routes. Others offered military advantages. Rowan studied each proposal with measured discipline, but none held his attention for long. Every conversation felt oddly incomplete. Meanwhile, Lord Cedric stood near the chamber doors with the hidden parchment secured inside his robe. He watched the king in thoughtful silence, knowing information that could alter the future of every territory under Rowan's rule. Still, he said nothing. The time was not yet right. Back inside the sanctuary, Alistair carefully extended another object toward Evelyn. It was an ancient leather journal, its cover embossed with the same moon and stars decorating the silver key. "Your mother wrote this for the day you returned," he said quietly. She believed there would come a moment when questions could no longer be answered by memories alone. Evelyn accepted the journal with trembling hands, unaware that the first page waiting beneath its weathered cover contained a truth capable of changing not only how she saw herself, but how an entire kingdom would soon remember its forgotten queen. The old leather journal felt surprisingly warm in Evelyn's hands, as though it had been waiting not on a forgotten shelf, but for this exact moment. She ran her fingertips across the faded cover before slowly opening it. The first page held only a single sentence written in elegant silver ink that had not faded with time. "My dearest daughter, if you are reading these words, then your heart has chosen kindness over power, and only then are you ready to carry both." Evelyn stared at the familiar handwriting. Although many years had passed since she had last seen her mother's letters, she recognized every graceful curve immediately. Her vision blurred as memories returned in quiet fragments. A gentle laugh beside a fireplace, warm hands brushing snow from her hair. A lullaby she had nearly forgotten. She carefully turned the page. Queen Eleanor had written not as a ruler addressing an heir, but as a mother speaking to the little girl she had been forced to leave behind. She explained that the Hawthorne queens had never ruled through fear or conquest. Their strength came from earning trust before asking for loyalty. Every generation had guarded peace between the great wolf kingdoms by placing compassion above pride. The crown, she wrote, belonged only to the one who could remain kind after experiencing heartbreak. Evelyn quietly lowered the journal for a moment. Until only days ago she had believed rejection marked the end of her future. Now she began to wonder whether it had simply been the doorway leading toward the life her mother had prepared long ago. Alistair watched her with patient understanding. Her Majesty believed pain reveals the true nature of every leader, he said softly. Power can be inherited. Character never can. Evelyn nodded without speaking. She understood those words more deeply than she wished. She had walked away from Silvercrest Palace without anger, not because the rejection had not hurt, but because hatred would have changed the person her mother hoped she would become. Outside, clouds drifted slowly across the bright blue sky, while cool mountain air carried the scent of pine and wildflowers through the open sanctuary. The peaceful valley no longer felt unfamiliar. Every sound, every breeze, every beam of sunlight seemed to welcome her home. At that same hour, Lord Cedric stood alone within the hidden royal archives beneath Silvercrest Palace. He carefully unfolded an ancient map rarely seen by living eyes. The northern territories stretched across faded parchment marked with dozens of forgotten royal symbols. Near the frozen mountains rested one crest that had remained untouched for nearly a quarter of a century. As Cedric watched, the silver ink upon that forgotten emblem slowly brightened until it glowed softly beneath the candlelight. His breath caught. Ancient records described only one event capable of awakening the lost seal. The rightful heir had accepted her inheritance. He immediately sealed 3 official letters with the royal council crest and summoned trusted messengers. Ride only to those who still remember the old oath, he instructed quietly. No one else must know until the guardians are ready. The riders departed before sunset, each carrying a message written in language few living nobles could still read. Far to the north, as evening painted the valley with shades of gold and violet, a deep bell echoed once across the sanctuary. Its peaceful tone rolled gently through the surrounding mountains before fading into silence. One by one, white birds lifted from the trees and circled high above the ancient ruins. Evelyn stepped outside with the journal still resting against her heart, unaware that the sound had traveled far beyond the valley itself. Across distant kingdoms, elderly keepers who had waited decades quietly looked toward the northern horizon with tears in their eyes, whispering the same words they had not spoken since the day their queen disappeared. She has finally come home. Evelyn spent the next morning exploring the sanctuary one quiet room at a time, guided not by curiosity alone, but by a growing sense that every hallway had once been part of her own forgotten story. Sunlight streamed through tall crystal windows, scattering delicate patterns across polished white floors, while the gentle sound of flowing water echoed from hidden channels carved beneath the ancient stone. Every chamber revealed another piece of a history she had never known belonged to her. There were maps of kingdoms that no longer existed, handwritten treaties bearing the signatures of rulers long remembered only in legends, and shelves filled with journals carefully preserved through generations of faithful guardians. Yet what touched her most was not the wealth or the history. It was the kindness woven through every record. Queen after queen had written about listening before judging, serving before leading, and protecting hope even when fear seemed easier. Evelyn closed another journal with quiet reverence, realizing her mother had not been the first to believe that compassion could shape the future of kingdoms. It had always been the Hawthorne way. Alistair walked beside her at an unhurried pace. The world remembers crowns, he said gently, but history is truly changed by the hearts beneath them. Evelyn smiled softly. Then I have much to learn. Every worthy ruler says those exact words, he replied. They entered a circular observatory where the ceiling had been crafted entirely from clear crystal, revealing the brilliant blue sky above. At the center stood a massive stone table engraved with the map Lord Cedric had secretly unfolded beneath Silvercrest Palace only a day before. As Evelyn approached, tiny silver lights appeared across the carved kingdoms one after another, slowly connecting distant territories through glowing lines. She looked toward Alistair in surprise. Before he could answer, one of the younger guardians hurried into the chamber with respectful urgency. "Keeper Alistair," he said, bowing first to Evelyn. "The first houses have answered the bell." Alistair nodded calmly, though relief shone in his eyes. "How many?" "7 by sunrise. 3 more before noon. Their banners are already moving north." Evelyn listened without fully understanding. "Who are they?" she asked. "Families who swore loyalty to your mother's house before your birth," Alistair answered. "For 24 years they remained silent because silence protected you. Now they have heard the sanctuary awaken." At nearly the same moment, Silvercrest Palace welcomed distinguished guests arriving from neighboring Alpha territories. Elegant carriages lined the royal courtyard as nobles gathered for a council banquet. King Rowan greeted each visitor with practiced confidence, yet he noticed something unusual almost immediately. Several respected elders who had never declined royal invitations were absent. Others arrived later than expected, carrying expressions more thoughtful than celebratory. During the evening meal, conversations drifted toward strange rumors spreading across the northern trade roads. Travelers spoke of white falcons flying in unusual numbers. Mountain villages claimed ancient bells had echoed through valleys abandoned for generations. Most dismissed the stories as harmless folklore. Rowan listened without concern, but Lord Cedric remained unusually quiet throughout the meal. He recognized every detail. None were accidents. As twilight settled over the sanctuary, Evelyn stepped onto a wide marble balcony overlooking the peaceful valley. One by one, distant lights appeared along winding mountain roads. At first, she mistook them for travelers carrying lanterns through the gathering dusk. Then she noticed something remarkable. Every group stopped at the valley entrance before lowering colorful banners toward the sanctuary in perfect silence. Blue, silver, white, deep emerald, crimson trimmed with gold. More lights continued appearing beyond the horizon, each representing another ancient house answering a promise that had never been broken. Evelyn stood quietly beneath the evening sky, unaware that the forgotten queen the world believed had vanished was no longer hidden, because the kingdom she had never known was already finding its way back to her. Morning mist floated gently across the valley as the first rays of sunlight touched the ancient sanctuary, turning its white stone walls into shimmering gold. Evelyn awoke to the quiet melody of birdsong drifting through the open windows, but another sound soon followed. It was the steady rhythm of footsteps echoing from the courtyard below. Curious, she walked toward the balcony overlooking the entrance and stopped in silent amazement. The valley that had stood empty only days before was now filled with people arriving from every direction. Elderly couples wrapped in traveling cloaks, respected scholars carrying weathered books, merchants leading wagons filled with supplies, and noble families wearing ancient crests gathered peacefully beneath the sanctuary walls. They did not speak loudly. They did not rush. One after another, they paused at the foot of the marble staircase, placed a hand over their heart, and bowed toward the sanctuary with quiet reverence before continuing inside. Evelyn turned toward Alistair in confusion. "They came because of me?" she asked almost in disbelief. Alistair smiled gently. "They came because hope finally returned. Many of them have waited their entire lives for this day." As they descended into the courtyard, the conversations gradually faded into respectful silence. Hundreds of eyes lifted toward Evelyn, yet none stared with curiosity or judgment. Instead, she saw warmth, gratitude, and quiet relief reflected in every face. A young mother stepped forward carrying a little girl no older than 6. The child held a small bouquet of white mountain flowers with both hands. "My grandmother told me to give these to our queen if I ever met her," the little girl said shyly. "She said you would always love flowers that grow without anyone planting them." Evelyn accepted the bouquet with trembling fingers, touched by kindness she had done nothing to earn. Before she could answer, An elderly woman standing nearby smiled through tears. "Your mother loved those flowers too," she whispered. Throughout the day, more visitors continued arriving. Every family carried a different story. Some remembered Queen Eleanor personally. Others had inherited promises passed down through generations. One elderly craftsman carefully unfolded a faded sketch showing a beautiful silver crown he had once repaired for Evelyn's grandmother decades earlier. Another family presented a carefully preserved banner embroidered with the Hawthorne crest, explaining they had hidden it for 24 years because they believed one day it would fly again. Each conversation revealed another thread connecting Evelyn to a history she had never imagined. Meanwhile, inside Silvercrest Palace, the atmosphere had begun to change in subtle ways that even King Rowan could no longer ignore. Several trusted allies unexpectedly postponed diplomatic meetings. Two respected Alpha leaders sent courteous letters explaining they needed to return north immediately due to urgent family obligations. Trade representatives quietly delayed agreements they had eagerly pursued only a week earlier. None offered clear explanations. Rowan studied the growing stack of postponed appointments with calm discipline, yet an unfamiliar feeling settled deep within him. It was not fear. It was uncertainty. Lord Cedric watched the king from across the council chamber, recognizing the invisible shift taking place. Kingdoms rarely changed overnight. They changed when loyalty quietly found a new direction. As evening settled over the sanctuary, dozens of colorful banners lined the valley entrance, fluttering together beneath the cool mountain breeze. Their colors reflected across the crystal streams like living ribbons beneath the fading sunlight. Evelyn stood among the gathered families holding the bouquet of white flowers close to her heart. She still did not think of herself as a queen. Yet without realizing it, she had already begun doing what every true queen before her had done. She listened to every story, remembered every name, and made every person standing before her feel seen. While far beyond the mountains, the first whispers spread across neighboring kingdoms that the forgotten House of Hawthorne was no longer a memory, but a living promise preparing to step back into history. 3 mornings later, the peaceful valley no longer resembled forgotten ruins hidden among the mountains. Colorful banners lined the marble pathways, crystal fountains reflected the bright autumn sky, and voices filled the sanctuary with quiet purpose instead of silence. Families worked together repairing ancient gardens, scholars carefully organized centuries of preserved records, and craftsmen restored weathered carvings that had patiently waited for hands willing to honor them again. Nothing had been commanded. People simply saw what needed to be done and offered their gifts freely. Evelyn moved among them without ceremony, stopping to help an elderly woman carry baskets of herbs, kneeling beside children planting fresh flowers near the entrance, and listening with genuine attention whenever someone wished to share a memory of Queen Eleanor. The more she served those around her, the more naturally they treated her as the leader they had hoped would someday return. Alistair observed quietly from beneath the shaded colonnade, a gentle smile crossing his face. "The crown has not touched her head," one guardian whispered beside him. "It does not need to," Alistair replied. "They have already placed it upon her heart." That afternoon, a procession of distinguished visitors arrived through the northern pass. Their horses carried no royal decorations, only the ancient crests of noble houses that had disappeared from public life decades earlier. Men and women of every age stepped down from their carriages before approaching the sanctuary. Without hesitation, each placed one hand over the heart and bowed respectfully to Evelyn. One elderly alpha with silver hair smiled warmly as he spoke. "My father promised that if the Hawthorne line ever returned, our family would answer before the second sunrise. We feared we would never fulfill that oath. Thank you for giving us the chance." Evelyn welcomed every guest with humility, insisting they be offered food, warm tea, and comfortable lodging before discussing anything concerning history or alliances. The visitors exchanged surprised glances. They had expected ceremony. Instead, they found kindness. Hundreds of miles away, Silvercrest Palace grew noticeably quieter with each passing day. Empty guest chambers stood prepared for visiting nobles who politely postponed their arrivals. Several diplomatic councils requested delays without offering detailed explanations. Trade routes remained open, taxes continued to arrive, and daily life appeared unchanged. Yet King Rowan sensed an invisible shift moving beneath the calm surface of his kingdom. During the afternoon council meeting, he finally turned toward Lord Cedric. "You have served 3 generations of rulers," Rowan said evenly. "Tell me what I am not seeing." Cedric hesitated only briefly before answering with careful honesty. "Sometimes kingdoms change long before maps do, Your Majesty. Loyalty does not always leave through the front gate. Sometimes it quietly follows hope." Rowan studied the old advisor for several thoughtful seconds. "What hope?" Cedric lowered his eyes respectfully. "I cannot answer that today." The response lingered in Rowan's thoughts long after the meeting ended. As evening settled across the sanctuary, Alistair invited Evelyn into the great ceremonial hall where hundreds of candles illuminated the polished white floor. At the center rested the silver circlet upon its velvet cushion, surrounded by representatives from every family that had answered the ancient bell. No music played. No grand announcement filled the room. Only peaceful silence remained. Alistair stepped forward and addressed the gathering. "For 24 years we protected a promise. Today we prepare to fulfill it. 7 days from now, beneath the next full moon, the House of Hawthorne will hold its first royal assembly in a generation." Every person present bowed their head. Evelyn felt both humbled and overwhelmed, knowing the path before her could never return to what it had once been. Beyond the mountains, carried by swift riders beneath the evening stars, formal invitations had already begun their journey toward every major kingdom, including one addressed to the ruler who still had no idea that the quiet woman he believed had faded into history was about to be welcomed back before the entire world. The invitation reached Silvercrest Palace just after sunrise, carried by a lone rider whose horse bore no royal colors and no crest recognized by the palace guards. The envelope itself was fashioned from thick ivory parchment, sealed with silver wax impressed by a symbol Rowan had never seen before, a crown woven from branches beneath a full moon surrounded by 7 stars. The messenger bowed respectfully, offered no explanation, and departed before anyone could question him. Rowan studied the unusual seal while the council gathered around the long oak table. Lord Cedric lowered his eyes the instant he recognized it. His silence said more than any warning could have. Rowan carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The elegant handwriting was steady and unmistakably formal. "The House of Hawthorne respectfully invites the rulers and representatives of every allied territory to attend the first royal assembly beneath the coming full moon. The gathering shall mark the return of an ancient throne preserved by oath, honor, and lawful succession. Your presence is welcomed in peace." Rowan read the message twice. "The House of Hawthorne?" he asked quietly. "I have never heard of a reigning house by that name." No one answered immediately. At last, Lord Cedric drew a slow breath. "Because it has not ruled publicly for 24 years. The council chamber fell silent. Rowan looked toward the elderly advisor. "Explain." Cedric stood and walked toward one of the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. "Long before your father claimed the northern throne, another royal house protected the mountain kingdoms through diplomacy rather than conquest. They disappeared so completely that many believe they had become only legend." Rowan frowned thoughtfully. "Legends do not send official invitations." "No," Cedric replied softly. "Only living heirs do." The words lingered in the room long after they were spoken. Rowan's eyes returned to the silver seal. Something about it stirred an uneasy familiarity he could not explain. Somewhere deep within memory, an image tried to surface before slipping away again. Meanwhile, far beyond the mountains, the sanctuary prepared for the coming assembly with quiet purpose rather than celebration. Fresh flowers lined the marble pathways. Crystal lanterns were carefully hung beneath ancient archways, and long tables crafted from polished cedar were placed throughout the valley to welcome every guest equally, whether noble or traveler. Evelyn moved among the volunteers with simple sleeves rolled neatly to her forearms, arranging books inside the restored library before carrying baskets of bread to families who had spent days preparing the sanctuary. More than once visiting nobles attempted to relieve her of the work, but she only smiled gently and thanked them before continuing. Alistair watched from across the courtyard. "You understand now why your mother never feared the future," he said quietly. Evelyn glanced toward him. "Because she trusted people?" because she trusted that kindness remembered is stronger than power remembered. That evening, as the final preparations continued beneath a sky painted with brilliant shades of amber and violet, Alastair led Evelyn into a quiet chamber overlooking the valley. Upon a carved wooden stand rested the silver circlet she had refused to wear days earlier. Beside it lay a folded cloak embroidered with the Hawthorne crest. "Tomorrow," Alastair said gently, "you will meet rulers who remember your family and rulers who have forgotten it. Do not become someone different for either of them." Evelyn looked toward the open window where hundreds of lanterns glowed softly throughout the valley. She placed one hand over the journal her mother had written and answered with calm certainty, "I cannot become someone different. I have only just begun discovering who I have always been." Hundreds of miles away, Rowan folded the invitation one final time before slipping it into his coat. For reasons he could not fully understand, he no longer saw the coming assembly as an ordinary diplomatic gathering. Somewhere beyond the mountains, a forgotten truth was waiting, and for the first time since the night Evelyn quietly walked away from his palace, he found himself wondering whether the path he had chosen had truly led toward the future he believed he wanted. The night before the royal assembly arrived wrapped in quiet anticipation rather than celebration. A full moon rose above the northern peaks, washing the sanctuary in soft silver light, while hundreds of crystal lanterns glowed gently along every marble path. The valley felt peaceful, yet beneath that calm rested the shared understanding that by sunrise nothing would remain hidden any longer. Delegations from distant kingdoms continued arriving through the mountain pass, their banners fluttering side by side in a display of respect that had not been witnessed for an entire generation. Some visitors had crossed hundreds of miles through changing weather simply to honor an ancient invitation. Others admitted they had come because too many impossible stories had begun to sound true at the same time. Evelyn stood alone for a few quiet moments beside the crystal stream where she had first seen the sanctuary awaken. The water reflected the moon so perfectly that it seemed to hold another sky beneath its surface. She remembered walking away from Silvercrest Palace believing she had lost everything that gave her future meaning. Now she understood that losing one path had allowed another, older road to reveal itself. She did not feel triumphant. She felt grateful. Alastair approached carrying the silver circlet and the embroidered cloak. He offered them without ceremony. "Tomorrow they will see symbols," he said gently. "Do not let them distract you from the woman who carried flowers for strangers and listened before she spoke. That is the queen they have truly come to meet." Evelyn accepted the cloak with a quiet smile. "I am still learning." Alastair nodded. "The wisest rulers never stop." Before dawn, bells echoed softly across the valley, calling every guest toward the great assembly hall. Long rows of polished cedar benches filled with nobles, scholars, village elders, merchants, and representatives from every allied territory. No seat had been reserved according to wealth or rank. Every guest entered through the same doorway. Every voice carried equal welcome. The simple arrangement surprised many visitors more than the restored sanctuary itself. Far to the south, King Rowan began his journey before sunrise accompanied by a modest royal escort rather than a ceremonial procession. The invitation had remained tucked safely inside his coat throughout the night, and although he had attended countless diplomatic gatherings during his reign, this journey felt unlike any before it. Lord Cedric rode beside him in thoughtful silence. As the mountain roads climbed higher, familiar landmarks gave way to valleys Rowan had never visited despite ruling the surrounding territories for years. He found himself wondering how an entire royal sanctuary could have remained hidden in lands he believed he knew so well. Near midday, the sanctuary finally appeared beyond the trees, its white stone walls gleaming beneath the clear autumn sky. Rowan guided his horse to a gentle stop. Hundreds of colorful banners moved gracefully in the breeze. Crystal lanterns shimmered beside flowing streams. Families greeted one another with warm embraces, while distinguished rulers spoke quietly beneath flowering archways. Nothing resembled a kingdom rising through conquest or ambition. Everything reflected patience, memory, and quiet dignity. Rowan stepped down from his horse without taking his eyes from the sanctuary. A feeling he could not name settled deep within him. It was neither fear nor confidence. It was the unmistakable realization that he had arrived at a place carrying a history he had never taken the time to understand. As the great bronze doors of the assembly hall slowly opened, every conversation gently faded into silence, and beyond those doors, waiting where moonlight and morning met, stood the moment that would reveal a truth capable of changing not only a forgotten kingdom, but the course of Rowan's own life forever. The great assembly hall fell completely silent as sunlight poured through towering crystal windows and painted long ribbons of silver across the polished white floor. Every ruler, elder, scholar, and traveler rose to their feet without being instructed, their attention fixed upon the entrance where two ancient doors slowly opened. Evelyn stepped inside wearing the silver-embroidered cloak Alistair had entrusted to her, yet it was not the cloak that drew every eye. It was the quiet confidence in her walk, the same gentle composure she had carried long before anyone called her queen. She paused at the center of the hall while the soft breeze carried the scent of cedar and fresh mountain flowers through the open windows. Alistair approached with the silver circlet resting upon a velvet cushion and spoke in a voice steady enough to reach every corner of the chamber. 24 years ago, this house chose silence to protect its future. Today, that silence ends, not through conquest, but through truth faithfully preserved. He lifted the circlet and gently placed it upon Evelyn's head. No brilliant spectacle followed. No thunder echoed across the mountains. Instead, something far more powerful happened. Every representative throughout the hall quietly placed a hand over the heart and bowed together. It was a gesture offered freely, not demanded by authority. Rowan stood motionless near the rear of the chamber, unable to look away. As Evelyn slowly turned toward the gathered assembly, sunlight illuminated her face exactly as it had in the portrait of Queen Eleanor hanging within the sanctuary. Recognition arrived with breathtaking clarity. The quiet woman he had dismissed as unworthy now stood before the rulers of neighboring kingdoms as the lawful heir to a forgotten throne. Memories returned all at once. Her calm acceptance inside Silvercrest Palace, the dignity with which she removed the silver ring, the kindness she had shown despite rejection. None of those moments reflected weakness. They revealed a strength he had never learned to recognize. Alistair invited Evelyn to address the assembly. She looked across the hall, meeting the eyes of old friends, unfamiliar guests, and finally Rowan himself. Her voice remained gentle, carrying neither bitterness nor triumph. My mother taught me that a crown is never proof of worth. It is a reminder of responsibility. Every person who stands here today helped preserve hope through years of silence. This kingdom will not be remembered because of one queen. It will be remembered because ordinary people chose faith over fear, kindness over pride, and loyalty over convenience. The hall remained silent for a heartbeat before warm applause gradually filled the sanctuary. Some smiled through tears. Others simply lowered their heads with quiet gratitude. Rowan slowly stepped forward after the gathering concluded. He stopped several feet away, respecting the distance Evelyn herself had once been forced to accept. Their eyes met for the first time since the night she walked away from Silvercrest Palace. Rowan offered a respectful bow, deeper than protocol required. I judged what I could see, he said quietly. I failed to recognize what truly mattered. Evelyn regarded him with calm compassion rather than resentment. We all make choices with the understanding we have at the time, she answered. Some choices become lessons that shape who we are. Afterward, there was no accusation in her words. There was no invitation either. Only honesty. Rowan nodded slowly, accepting the truth without argument. As evening settled across the valley, crystal lanterns reflected upon the flowing streams while laughter and conversation returned to the sanctuary. Evelyn stood upon the marble terrace overlooking the mountains that had guarded her family's legacy for generations. The same moon that had witnessed her rejection now shone upon her homecoming, and she finally understood that destiny had never been about proving her worth to the one who turned away. It had always been about discovering the strength, grace, and purpose that had quietly lived within her all along. Because the greatest crowns are not earned by demanding loyalty, but by living in a way that inspires others to offer it willingly.